Hello everyone, and welcome to another Astroneer video, this time covering the topic of Auto Extractor state detection. Now what I mean by that is we are going to be covering a circuit that I have created that detects when this piston of the Auto Extractor is in its up position. Now this can happen in one of two states, either the storage for the Auto Extractor is full, or the resource bar displayed on these little segments here is depleted. Now you might be thinking you can do this with a power sensor, but when this Auto Extractor is in the on state, even if it is not working, there is no power change. It continues to draw power regardless. But for storage, you could easily do it with the storage sensor. However, this circuit that I'm going to be displaying is going to cover the possibility where the storage might not be full, but the resource bar is depleted, and it can cover the storage case also. So we decide to do these with the sensor hoops. The small of which requires a zinc and 2 quartz. This one requires 2 zinc and 1 quartz, so they're both relatively similar in what resources they require, and you can really choose either of them. I opted to go for the large one just because it gave me a little bit of extra distance off, but primarily the reason I opted to use these is because of the objects that allow them to trigger. So players can obviously trigger these guys, and you see a little movement on the blue screen right there. Zebra balls can also trigger, as well as vehicles or recreational spheres too. Now, my original idea was to place a zebra ball on top of this, but I came up with a better solution because apparently the vehicles do not actually need to be in the empty or in the open state. You can have a packaged vehicle trigger one of these sensor hoops, which actually is probably going to contribute a lot to some new discoveries that people are going to be making. Now, just to cover a little bit of my setup very early on, I do have this Auto Extractor powered by 2 RTGs, which is covering the complete power threshold needed for this Auto Extractor. I also have an auto arm that's just going to be bringing the materials off. This is just to guarantee that the storage does not fill up. If the storage does fill up, because you cannot use a medium resource canister, this is going to stop and trigger prematurely. So an auto arm setup like this is needed just to make sure that you don't fill up the storage if you are truly waiting to let the resources completely run out. Now, the important thing to note is with the power, at 2 RTGs of power, it takes roughly 69 ticks, 68, 670, give or take 1, for the auto arm to complete an entire cycle. And this is necessary because we have a timing aspect to this thumper. So if you use a little bit less power than the maximum, the timing is going to be different, and you're going to need to play with the timing and make sure that you have the proper amount set. However, for full power, it takes roughly 68, 69, 70, I would go middle ground, 69 ticks for the thumper to do one complete cycle. So with this circuit here, this is powered by an RTG just to make sure that we have power. You can easily power this with one of the small generator if you have enough organic, or small wind turbines or small solars. You don't need any amount of power, you just need power in general, but just doing it with an RTG here is just for ease of access. Now the first thing that I want to cover is this circuit right here. These are the conditions that lead us to allowing our circuit to notify people to trigger. So we do that with just a work light for local, but we also do it with a beacon, just to display to basically as far as you can, hey, this is done. Now this first one is an enable. So the enable starts in the on state, but once we actually trigger the circuit, we turn it off just to prevent it from continuously flipping the beacon and whatnot. This right here is the up state of the Auto Extractor. So when it's up, this is enabled. And when it drops down, this tractor is actually going to trigger the sensor hoop. So that's going to turn off. And then when it comes back up, it's going to turn it back on. And again, this is to determine that we have the Auto Extractor in the up state. If it drops down, then we're going to disable this, and hopefully that disable times out with these delay repeaters. And when it comes back up, it's going to turn on, hopefully not in the time that our delay repeaters trigger. And then if it stays up for too long of a time, then our timer is going to trigger this one, which is going to open this up, and then we're going to have power come through, and then we're going to be able to display that our Auto Extractor has stopped. Now, this right here, this switch, as I said, comes from the delay repeaters. This delay repeater triggers the switch for the first time, triggers it on this one, and then this delay repeater is only open for one single tick, and then it turns it back off. So this is a method to make sure that this power switch is only enabled for a singular tick, and hopefully it doesn't overlap if our Auto Extractor is still working. It only overlaps if this has been on for a prolonged amount of time, and I'll cover how I generally set that up to make sure that that happens. this is all part of the cycle over here. So as I mentioned, we have roughly 69 ticks, so 25, 25, and 19. And then this one is just a 1 extra cycle, but it doesn't actually factor in because we go to restart our cycle right over here. This circuit is not entirely necessary. From this delay repeater, you can easily wire it up back to the starting one. It's just that this would repeat forever and it would never stop. So I opted to create a break in it. So it goes to this power switch, which opens up this, allow power through. This is the enable for the power sensor on this side. So after this one has triggered, which is like the signal, it's going to turn off the enable so that this power switch will no longer trigger and no longer cause this cycle to continue. On the other hand, this one, as I mentioned, is opened up from the last delay repeater, and then it's turned off by the segment pin just to allow us to constantly reopen this and continue the cycle. So now we can get into the actual operation of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trigger this, I'm going to wait a moment, and then I'm going to open up the switch and start this cycle. So while we watch this, you see that that's open because it's in the up state. It's going to drop, turns it off, and that corresponds with the time where our sensor triggers, our delay repeaters trigger. So again, we're in the up state, this is on. When it drops, that turns off, and that off state corresponds with making sure that this sensor is not flipping on right. So in order to do this, you want to get this sensor hoop as close to the up position as possible for the auto arm, but not enough to prevent this from triggering, because this needs to trigger when going down, as you see it move right there, and then also when it comes up, as you see it move right there. And as an example, just to show you how close we are to the timing, the auto arm dropped roughly right about here on the delay repeater. So we're going to let that delay repeater come back down, and it's going to be roughly in the same exact position, right about there as well. So again, 69 ticks seems to be the good value for the maximum amount of power. And this is going to run until this no longer has any resources. And this is because, again, we have storage coming off of it. So I'm just going to turn this off, and you'll see it staying in the up position. Our delay repeater is now trigger. So this was open for a singular tick, but it was long enough to trigger this power sensor. So this is going to cause the work light to turn on for just like a local display, but it also turns on this beacon from the off state. So as I mentioned, we have our timer no longer running because we broke the enable on the timer power switch, and we broke the enable on this power switch as well. So we're not continuously cycling either the work light or the beacon. So that's the general setup over here, and what it's going to look like from afar is I have this button connected to a beacon in the distance. So theoretically, when your auto extractor stops and you trigger your circuit, the beacon then appears in the distance. So that's what's going to look like when you're done. It does turn blue just because the default from the off state is blue, but if you wanted it to say start on the lightish purplish color, you can have it start there, and then when you trigger it, you can be like, oh, it turned pink. Okay, I know that I now need to go do it. You can do it with any color of beacon as long as you understand the system yourself. But that's generally the circuit. If you guys have any questions or have any other ideas, by all means, feel free to comment either below or hit me up in the Astroneer Discord or come into one of my streams sometime or Twitter or anything like that. This does not mean that this is the only way to do it. This is the way that I have discovered and the way that I've found that works best for me. There are certainly probably other ways to do it, and I implore you guys, definitely explore them. See if you guys can come up with any other ideas yourselves. But if you would like to use this, by all means, feel free to do so. I hope it's not as complex as some of the other designs that I've created, and hopefully it was a little bit easier to follow and understand the explanation of. But with that being said, that's going to round out the end of this video. So by all means, if you haven't done so already, either subscribe here or follow me on Twitch or something like that. I certainly stream a lot more on Twitch than I do create YouTube videos. So if you enjoy this content, then by all means, hang out sometime there. Until then, though, have a good rest of your day, and hopefully I'll see you guys in another video.